Hello, everyone. Welcome to another webinar promoted by SoftExpert. Today's event discusses about maintenance backlog. The webinar will be conducted by Mr. James Kovacevic, a principal instructor at Erudicio and an experienced professional in industrial maintenance and reliability, having worked for several large companies. I wish you all a great webinar.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. We're going to talk about the black hole of maintenance, also known as the maintenance backlog, and I'm sure some of you can relate to this. Definitely a topic that I've come across and something I've had to live through in the past, so I think it should be a fun, interesting discussion today. Now, for those of you I haven't had the opportunity to meet, or you haven't had the opportunity to listen to me before, ramble on. My name is James. I'm a principal instructor with Erudicio. I've been with them about 3 years now. I also host a weekly podcast rooted in reliability. There we bring on all kinds of experts, talk about maintenance and reliability topics, whether it's spare parts, FMEAs, the soft side of things, change, asset management, all of the above. Aside from that, I may say some words funny. I am Canadian. Don't hold it against me. And on a personal side, like Maureen said, you might hear some noises. I have 3 young kids that are all cooped up in the house. They're raring to go. We had, I think, one nice day in the past week where they could get outside and play. So they're getting ready to lose their mind at this point. Overall, I've spent about 17, 18 years now in industrial maintenance in one way or another. I started off as an industrial electrician, became a maintenance supervisor, maintenance planner, moved on to maintenance manager. Then I went and worked for a large company by the name of Diageo. Some of you may recognize it, some of you may not, but they manufacture Crown Royal, Captain Morgan, Guinness, Johnny Walker, all those great products. And I spent some time with them working in Africa, South America, Europe, India, as well as North America, implementing maintenance and reliability best practices before I came over to Erudicio. But before we get into it, I got a question for you guys. Maureen, if you can launch the first poll of, do you track backlog? I want to know how many of you guys are actually tracking backlog before we get in. All right, there's a poll there. There's 3 options. Let me know if you're tracking it, if so, how, and that'll just help me kind of formulate the rest of this presentation.
All right, the votes are coming in. Give another couple seconds, get the percentage up a little bit. All right, so it's looking like you got the majority, about 50% are saying yes in work order count, okay, with 34% doing it by weeks and days, and 16% coming in with a big old no.
All right, excellent. Good to know. I'm glad the vast majority are or at least tracking backlog one way or another. Now we're going to talk about work order count versus weeks or days, what's better, what's not. We're going to talk about that, but at least you guys are tracking something. And that's a great start. So knowing that, I want to talk about the black hole of maintenance. NASA defines the black hole as a place in space where gravity pulls so much that not even light can escape. And I've been asked in the past, why do I think the maintenance backlog can be related to a black hole? And I think back of my time as a maintenance planner and even a maintenance manager, and I would get a ton of questions from operations on a regular basis. Why is our work not being done? What is the status of our work? Why bother putting in a work request or notification if you guys never do it? It didn't necessarily mean we weren't doing it. Maybe it was just prioritized and scheduled out further, or maybe we're waiting on parts. Or maybe there were issues that it wasn't approved. But there were a lot of things that were going on that gave that perception. The main reasons that I have it typically find that, the backlog is a black hole is because requests are submitted and are never seen or heard from again. So, that's on us as maintenance people. Are we communicating back if they've been approved, or if they've not been, or if they haven't been approved? Have we communicated when they're going to be done, right? If we're going to do the work, have we ever communicated when that is likely to happen? Is the status of that work order known or readily visible to people? Another reason why. Maybe it's a large, complex job, and we know that it requires lots of planning. We got to go through management of change activities. We got to do all these things. So is there a status that indicates that to people when they're looking up their requests? And there's probably a bunch more reasons, and we'll get into some more of those. But what I find is this black hole, the backlog, is one of the reasons why we struggle to get buy-in from operations. Why would they ever bother submitting work requests if we don't communicate out when we're going to do them, when they're expected to be done, or even the fact that we did do them, but it was on an off shift, right? They don't have that communication. They don't have that visibility. So we can't expect them to continue to submit work requests. It's like asking your mechanics to provide feedback on job plans, but never updating those job plans with the feedback. So the black hole of maintenance perception exists. And what we need to do is we need to overcome that, and doing so will help generate support from operations. Now, before we get into that, what I want to do is I want to talk about backlog a little bit first. All right. Now, some of you may have seen this video that we use. I'm not going to play the video, but what I'm going to do is kind of describe the model. So the funnel here represents our work management process, if you will. Now, above this funnel, you see clouds and raindrops. And if you notice, some of the raindrops are falling into that funnel and some are falling out of it. And those raindrops represent our maintenance requests. Now, some of the reasons why they may be falling outside is they're not approved. It might be a duplicate work order, or maybe simply they're putting those requests on sticky notes, phone calls, emails, and not actually into the CMMS, and as a result, they're getting missed. Now, what happens is these requests are going to come in and they're going to go into that funnel and they're going to fill it up. Now, if you see the total backlog piece there, the yellow, that is our backlog of all work in our system. Stuff that's being planned, stuff that's planned and ready to go, stuff that's being scoped or waiting for parts. It's all work within the system that hasn't been completed yet. Further below that, you see the planned ready backlog, that green section. That is the work that is ready to be executed at any given point. That means it's planned, parts are here, work orders are ready to go, and given the equipment and resources, we can execute that right away. Right. Now you see that fancy little straw down the middle. It's a special funnel. That special funnel, that straw, represents our PM workload. So that's just going to flow right through our backlog. We're not going to backlog it up because we have to stay within our frequencies, whether it's a legislative requirement or for our own PM program. Now, what's going on in this is as those requests come into the top of that funnel, the maintenance planner should be taking those jobs and converting them through the planning process to planned ready backlog. All right, that's going to give us that green there. From there, we're going to go into scheduling. All right, so at the bottom of that funnel, and this is a special funnel, remember, we have the ability to control the diameter of that output of that funnel, and that represents our available hours. So if we have overtime we can run, we can open that up. If we want to reduce overtime, we close down that funnel. It represents our maintenance resources. Now, backlog is important because it tells us, do we have the right number of people? Are we getting the right number of follow-ups? Are we getting the right number of requests? It gives us all this information. And by using both planned ready and total backlog, we can see how good we are converting our requests to planned ready work. We can see, do we have the right number of resources? There's a variety of different things we can do with it. Now, the challenge with this is having planned ready backlog and total backlog is if we measure in work order count, does that really tell us how long it's going to take to complete this work? If I have 50 work orders for electrical and 60 work orders for pipe fitters, who has more work? You don't really know because you don't know the context of that work or what's involved in that work. So when we calculate backlog, we want to use it based on hours, which we can convert that based on our available resource hours to determine how many weeks of total and ready backlog we need. Ideally, we're aiming between 4 and 6 weeks of total backlog. And then we're aiming for 2 to 4 weeks of planned ready backlog. That's really going to enable us to start building a proper schedule. Now you see the first bucket directly underneath that funnel. That is next week's schedule. That we want to load up to 100% of available time. 2 weeks out, you see that down there? That backlog is also going to allow us to forecast and start building a rolling schedule 2 weeks out, 3 weeks out, and 4 weeks out. This makes the scheduling process easier. But 2 weeks out, we're going to be at 75%, 3 weeks out, 50%, and 4 weeks, it's not 25%, it's 30%. Because in a proactive work model, we expect about 30% of our time to be spent on PM and PDM activities. We're going to take that first week there at the bottom of that funnel, and then we're going to cascade that out through micro scheduling to the individual days. All right. Backlog is important because it enables us to schedule our work properly. It enables us to take full advantage of our resources. Now, I got another poll for you. I want to know what your current backlog is. Maureen, can you fire up the next poll?
Here we go. And someone had also asked, as we're letting folks put their answers in, should you be scheduling to 100%? Does that not cause issues with found work?
Great question. We're going to actually cover that in a few minutes, but the answer is yes, you should be scheduling to 100%, and it's for one particular reason. It's called Parkinson's Law, and we're going to discuss Parkinson's Law in a couple slides, and we'll talk about how we deal with that found work or follow-up work that arrives through the week.
Oh man, sorry, didn't mean to jump the gun there. Okay,
no problem.
So here's how your answers are looking. You got about the majority of folks, about 37%, are at greater than 4 weeks. Coming in next, actually tied at 24% each, are 2 to 4 and unknown, and about 15% are at less than 2 weeks.
All right, interesting. Now, what's interesting with that is, we have the majority above the 4 week mark. What that means is that's one of the issues that we have from a black hole perception. We're not able to get the work done that was expected. One of the things we can do for that, we can add resources. We might have to look at PM optimization. We need to look at a lot of things. Or is that just a temporary trend? If we're temporarily sitting at 4 weeks because we know there's a shutdown in a couple weeks, not a big concern. But if we're constantly above 4 weeks and trending constantly above 4 weeks, that tells us that there's something going on. Either we're not being efficient with our resources, we don't have enough resources, there's a variety of things there. If we're in that 2 to 4 weeks, that's where we want to be. We want to be between 2 to 4 weeks because it's going to allow us to develop a good schedule. Now, the challenge with less than 2 weeks is, do you have enough work that you can fill up your schedule? I know you have more than 1 week's worth of work, but do you have enough to honestly fill up that week's worth of work with all the constraints? Do we get the equipment we want? Do we get the resources and skills we want when we need them? There's those types of challenges. Now, how do we calculate backlog? All right, so there's a little bit of math here, but as an example, if we have 20 technicians working 40 hours a week each, that gives us about 800 gross available hours. Now, we factor out the one tech on vacation, we lose 40 hours there. We're going to lose about 50 hours a week for breaks, lunches, those types of things. We take all that away, we're going to get about a net available hours of about 710. Now, if our total backlog, so the estimated time to complete all the work orders outstanding in the system, is 3,800 hours, we divide that by 710, we get 5.35. With our ready backlog, work that's planned, ready to go, we can execute it this second of 1785. Once again, divide that by that 710, we're going to get about 2.51 weeks. All right, calculating backlog, you can get very, very in depth with training time, with all these other factors in it. If that's what you want to do, by all means, go ahead. What I really want from a backlog perspective is I want to be able to trend these to see, is it going up, is it going down, is it with somewhere in that 2 to 4 weeks. What I tell a lot of people is, if we establish that 710 hours available for work is the average, use that in your calculation for a period of time, whether we add more people or reduce people, or once a year we review and update based on absenteeism, vacations, that sort of thing. We want to try and normalize that number over time and see if these are going up or down. To me, it's more important to know the trend of these numbers than the exact number it is. But that's going to allow us to start managing our work. Now, why do we want to do all this? Why do we want to schedule and have this backlog of 2 to 4 weeks of planned ready, 4 to 6 weeks of total backlog? Well, that 4 to 6 weeks of total backlog allows us to plan and order materials in time to do that work. the plans ready allows us to facilitate the development of a good schedule. Now, if we're developing good schedules, what should happen is our wrench time should improve. Now, from a scheduling standpoint, our goal is to improve wrench time or active repair time. And I want to make something clear before we get into a tangent on wrench time, is that these numbers here, whether our wrench time is 17%, 20%, whatever it may be, that's not the fault of the craft. It's driven by the management system we have, the work management system, how we manage our backlog, how we schedule work. That's what drives these numbers. It's not the crafts or technician's fault. It's our management system we're using. Now, in a typical maintenance department, they're going to spend about anywhere from 17 to 35% of their time actively doing the work that we hired them to do, using their knowledge, skills, abilities, those sorts of things. They'll lose about 5% to looking for instructions, having good job plans. They'll lose about 12% to going back and forth to the storeroom looking for parts and tools, about 15% to travel, about 8% for coordination, waiting for operations to shut down and lock it out, waiting for the electrician to show up to unwire the motor, so on and so forth. We got late starts and early quits. You guys all know pre-break. We got to warm up our lunches before break time starts. We got some idle time at the job site. We got authorized breaks, and then we got some excessive personal time. By having a backlog and scheduling properly, we can target these. Now, I got one more. I got poll for you again. I promise we're a little poll heavy in the beginning and it'll fade away in a bit. But Maureen, can you launch the next one on estimated wrench time?
Yep, here we go.
Now, if you've answered the
These
poll,
polls make me nervous. Only because every time I go to lunch, when I move in my chair and my dogs like get startled, and just don't look out the window and start barking at somebody. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead. What you were going to say, James?
What I was going to say is, if you've answered the poll for wrench time, what your estimated wrench time is, go ahead and throw in the question box what you think the major contributing factors are to not achieving a high wrench time. All right. Now, the best in class is about 55%. All right. That's what best in class are. We're always going to have some losses, but really want to get a feeling where everyone thinks they kind of sit.
All right. So here's the breakdown. The majority, we're at 44%, are in that 20 to 40%. Then you've got 24% are saying unknown. 18% are at 41 to 55. So yay, you guys. And then about 14% are at the less than 20. All
right, excellent. So for the vast majority of us, we have an opportunity to improve, to get to that 55% or better. That's the best in class. And having a good backlog and scheduling process is what enables us to do that. Now, someone asked, do we schedule for 100%? And that's really what we want to be doing from a backlog perspective and a scheduling process, is taking that backlog, scheduling for 100% of our available resources. And the reason why is Parkinson's law. So if anyone's ever read The 4-Hour Work Week, I thought it was a great book. I'm still working way more than 4 hours a week, but in there they talk about Parkinson's law. And Parkinson's law states that work will expand to fill the time allotted. So if I give out a bunch of work orders and I'm only scheduling until 60% of their time, what you're going to see is something like this. There's going to be a lot of effort up front. And then you're going to see as we hit that peak, that effort on that work is going to taper out and it's going to go long. Now, if we have a schedule and we're scheduling for 100% of our time and we put a deadline or a time estimate on what we think this is going to be, what we'll typically find is that the level of effort is going to change. All right, it's going to look something like this. Now, to make this a little more real for you, I'll give you an example. I typically, aside from the last couple of weeks, spend my time flying around and coming home on the weekends. So I'm gone to client sites Monday through Friday, come home on the weekends. When I get home on a weekend, I generally have a list of things to do around the house. Now, taking Parkinson's law into account, if I understand what that list is on Friday and I make a plan, or I schedule those activities for myself. Saturday morning, I'll typically get up, go to the hardware store, grab what I need, come home, work, and get that stuff done. And usually my wife has a time that says, okay, we're going here at this time, so 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I get a lot of that work done usually the vast majority of it, by that 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, if I don't have that list and I don't review it and I don't plan it out, what happens Saturday morning? I wake up and I say, I got some stuff to do. I go get a coffee, I wander around the hardware store too long, come back home, work around the garage, and not really get done what I was supposed to do. That's Parkinson's law at work. Because I didn't have a plan, I didn't have a schedule, I didn't set my goal, work is going to expand to fill that time allotted. I'll find stuff to do to entertain myself until that time, right? That's how Parkinson's law works. And by scheduling 100% of our time, that is the reason why we do that, is to overcome Parkinson's law. Now, to answer the question that came up earlier is, what happens with that found work, the stuff that comes up? Well, if we have a good scheduling process, and we'll talk about this a little bit further, or in a little bit more detail, but if we have that good process, we should have work priorities on that schedule. What we do is we drop that lowest priority work in place of the found work and reschedule that low priority work on the schedule. All right. We want to make sure that we schedule for 100%, understand there is going to be things found, but then drop that low priority work and come back to that the emergency work that arises. All right. That's what we're really trying to do. So backlog is really there to enable us to schedule 100% to overcome Parkinson's law. There's also another reason why we need backlog. All right. The first is resources. We have a variety of skilled resources within our facility. We might have electricians, millwrights, instrumentation, those types of things, those types of skills. We may not always have the right number every single week. Maybe we have extra instrumentation work or electrical work this week, but the following week we don't have as much. Maybe we have more pipe fitting next week and we don't have a lot this week. By having a backlog, we can move around some of that work to level out our available resources and skills. The other reason we have backlog is, I know most maintenance people would love to have an entire warehouse filled with an exact duplicate of the lines or equipment that they have, but that's not a reality for most. So by having a backlog, we can understand when this work's going to hit and order those materials on demand. It allows us to reduce the total inventory we're holding because we're ordering on demand with that backlog. The other reason is, do we always get the equipment we want? I remember being a maintenance planner trying to get a bunch of work done on a filler. And did I always get that filler when I wanted it? No. I'd be lucky if I got it for 4 hours every 2 or 3 weeks. So we need a backlog to be able to overcome some of the equipment access constraints or availability constraints from operations. The other reason, similar to resources and skills and parts, there's specialized equipment we may need. So these types of things, we need to balance all 4 of these to come up with a good schedule, and having a backlog will enable us to do that. If I have less than a week's backlog or 1 week worth of planned ready backlog, I have no ability to move this work around to accommodate all these different constraints. It's very, very difficult. All right, so we need backlog to enable us to schedule properly, but that doesn't mean it has to become a black hole. So now that we understand why we need the backlog, let's talk about why is it perceived as a black hole? One of the biggest reasons in my experience is it's perceived as a black hole because of poor communication. Either we don't update the statuses of the work orders within the system. Now, how many of you are using SAP or Maximo but never update the work order status? How are people supposed to know without calling or emailing or searching around to figure out where this is? Is it done? Is it in planning? Is it waiting for parts? Where is it? It sounds simple, but the status of work and updating that within the work order in the CMMS is a huge, huge help for everyone involved. Instead of people calling you to see where that work order is, they can run a report or they can look it up and see exactly where it is in the planning process. All right. If it's been rejected for whatever reason, if we don't communicate that out, people assume it's being done. Now, how many of you guys have an approval process for work orders, but don't include a method to go circle back and say it's been approved or rejected? It may have been approved or rejected, whatever the reasons why, but if we don't communicate that back, nobody knows. Or what about if it's been completed? And once again, we're not communicating that back, so people think we're just ignoring it. Or when is it going to be done? Maybe it's a large job and we need a big outage to do, so that's going to be done in 8 or 12 weeks or 16 weeks out. Well, because we scheduled it out, because we needed that outage, if we don't communicate why, once again, people start thinking that it's the black hole. That slow response is another reason, all right? You know, I hear a lot of things when I go into sites, and, you know, in a past life, you know, you never get my work done. You know, it sits in your backlog for months. Why don't you ever do what I need? You do what everyone else needs, and so on and so forth. You know, there's that slow response period, and having a good defined prioritization and scheduling process will help to overcome some of that. And we'll get into that in a moment. But, you know, if we don't respond quickly, people assume we're not doing it. And that's not necessarily the case, right? We might be waiting on parts and equipment and so on and so forth. The other major reason is there's no process, right? There's no work management process that exists. You know, the request goes from someone rates the mechanic jumps on that, starts doing the work on the line, and what happens? We bypass the whole work management process. So the planned work that should have been getting done is no longer getting done. We're probably doing work that may not be as important as some of the planned work that should have, and what happens? We push the planned work further out. So by not having a process, we just make this worse and worse. And the biggest problem with all this is, even if we do have a process, if we don't communicate well, if we're slow to respond, those types of things, everyone starts working around the system. All right, everyone starts going directly to the mechanics or the maintenance team lead or maintenance supervisor on the shifts or the foremans, and avoids the entire planning process. What happens when this occurs? We get less planned work done, and we become more reactive overall. So instead of planning work, the planner scheduler is just throwing work orders on a schedule, potentially without those parts and tools, which causes more work to not be done, and the black hole perception gets worse. If we allow people to work outside and around the system, we drive ourselves to be more reactive, right? So we need to have that process, and we need to hold ourselves accountable to it. Easier said than done. I definitely recognize that. But before we go any further, if you guys can just throw in the question box, how many of you have a good defined work management process? Right? You know, while you guys are answering that, one of the things around working around with this system, what we find typically, or I find typically, is that planner / scheduler, they end up doing more scheduling rewrites, reworking the schedule more, which eliminates their time to plan proactively. That's what I find when we work around the system. All right, Maureen, did anyone chime in if they have a good work management system?
Yeah, seeing actually a lot of yeses. So I don't know if those are the ones that just want to be proud that they do, and those that don't are just not replying. But it looks like we got a good group here that do have systems in place.
Excellent, excellent. You know, that process really helps eliminate this black hole perception. It's one of those things that, you know, enables that communication to go out proactively. Everyone understands where to look for things, that sort of thing. So understanding some of these constraints around the black hole of maintenance, what can we do to overcome it? So the first thing, I think, is we need to properly prioritize our work. All right. Now, there's a couple different ways to do this, and we're going to look at that in a moment. But if we don't prioritize our work in a consistent format, that's going to be a challenge. If we prioritize based on the squeaky wheel system, then we continue to make that perception of the black hole even more so, because people who are following the process aren't getting their work done. So we need proper prioritization in place for our work. We also need to create buy-in with operations, right? So part of the reason why it might be a black hole to them is they don't understand how the process works. They don't have any input to the process. They don't have any of those things in place. So we need to create buy-in with operations. This next one here, some people will agree with it, some people won't agree with it. I think it depends on the maturity of the organization, the work management process, if they need to do this or not. But reviewing the backlog regularly. Now, if we got a very, very robust work management process, we're not going to have to go back and review that backlog regularly, because we're closing it out, we're updating statuses, we're doing all the things we need to do, so our backlog's going to be pretty clean. But if we're not there yet, we got to do a regular review, make sure the completed work is out. If stuff is no longer valid because, you know, maybe it was a corrective work, but it failed, we made the repair on a emergency work order, we can get rid of that corrective, and so on and so forth, all right? And then lastly, we got to work within that work management system or that process if we don't have that. So let's talk about prioritization. All right. So Maureen, I think I have a poll for this. If not, we'll just do it through the questions. But how many of you have a formal prioritization method? Whether it's a matrix like you see on the screen, a logic tree, something. How many of you have a formal prioritization process?
Yeah, we did have a poll, so folks are filling that in as we speak. Just a couple more seconds, get the percentage up here. Like about 65% at a yes, about 37% at a no. But those percentages change as I was saying that. I know that doesn't add up to 100, guys. I'm going crazy, but not that crazy.
All right, excellent. So the vast majority of you have a formal process. That is great to hear. That helps eliminate some of these perceptions. One of the typical methods is what you see here. It's a rhyme matrix. All right, and the way that works is we have the criticality of our assets down one side of the grid. On the left-hand side, you can see that. And then we have the different types of work we're going to do across the top. Each one is allotted a number, and sure enough, you just match up the grids, or you multiply the two numbers against each other, and you get that outcome. We're going to prioritize the highest number first. But one of the challenges with this, and where some organizations fail and further make the issue of the black hole, is that they only use that piece. What we really need to do if we're using a rhyme metric is you need to add a third criteria there, and that is how old is this work order? Because to eliminate the perception of the black hole of maintenance, if we have someone from the office who has, a light out or something that's not working, and it's only showing up at like an 8 or a 16 or somewhere in that range for our rhyme numbers, is that work ever going to get done? Chances are no, it's going to be trumped by all the other work that's much higher priority. So what we want to do is take that particular number that we have and multiply it against the work order age. So you see, for example, if it's less than 30 days old, we multiply that number by 1. If it's between 31 and 60, we're going to multiply it by 3, and so on and so forth. What that does is it forces the lower priority work to get done based on the age. All right, and that helps eliminate the perception of the black hole. Right? Now, up here, for example, these work order ages, these multipliers, that's just an example. Part of getting the buy-in from operations is aligning what those are with them. Same thing with the asset criticality, same thing with the work classification. Get them involved and have them help you build what these rhyme matrices look like. All right, that is one of the ways to overcome it. Now, another way to prioritize the work is just using a simple logic tree method. Right? Is this a corrective maintenance? Yes. Okay. Schedule for 2 to 4 weeks out. Is this a project? Schedule for 4 to 6 weeks out, and so on and so forth. You can build a very basic logic tree, and the reason why I like that logic tree approach, especially in the beginning, is that if we're using those high-level buckets, 2 to 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, that sort of thing, and if you're using something like SAP where you use revision codes, for example, you can throw in a revision code for a week that's 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks out, and you start building a rolling schedule. It makes scheduling easier, but it also guides your planners on what jobs do I got to plan first, at least at a first pass. Right? One of the other ways you do some of this, and it helps with the perception again, is to review all new work requests daily. Now, it doesn't mean you got to do detailed review of all the new work requests, but what it is at a high level is this a valid work order, yes or no? Is it something that's better handled as an emergency or unscheduled work this week? For example, we got a belt that's failing, we know it's going to fail in the next 2 days. That shouldn't go to planning. We're going to use that high-level review to push that over to the maintenance team leader, maintenance supervisor to get executed that day or the following day. What that does is it prevents that emergency work going into the planning process and us not acting on it in time. It also removes some of that clutter that's going to tie up our planner's time. It really allows us to free that up. So, use the rhyme method, use the logic tree approach, and use a daily review or a combination of any of the three to prioritize that work and make sure that, it's enabling us to focus on what's most important. Now, another way to get operations buy-in, and we talked about it briefly, is involve them in the prioritization process. Whether it's sitting down at a scheduling meeting once a week and prioritizing that last 10 or 15%, having them help develop that criticality, those variety of those things. All right, we want to get them involved. Having a weekly scheduling meeting, I find, is very, very, very important for getting their buy-in. right? So what we typically find is as we looked at that work management funnel and the progressive scheduling model, 2 weeks out, we have about 75% of our work planned. All right, that's based on our PMs, corrective work we know we have to get done, that sort of thing, but we still got that 25% there. What I like to do is I like to save 10% of that time, and operations can request whatever they want, not based on priority or criticality, but we're going to save that 10%, bring us your top 1, 2, or 3 to get done. Now, the reason we do this is not because it's the most important work for the operation or for the site, but to get their buy-in to the process. If they know they can bring their top 1 or 2 every week, we allot a certain amount of time for those things, they're more likely to use the system. All right, I use this as a way to build buy-in for the work management process. You save that 10% regardless of priority for what their requests. Right. Once we're doing that, we're going to finalize and use them for that 10% plus the remaining amount to fill up that schedule to that 100%. One of the big things I found made a big difference is when we first started doing this in a past life, operations say, yeah, that's great, that's beautiful, and then they'd move on. And then we'd go to shut down a piece of equipment on the scheduled time and we wouldn't get it, or it would get moved, and the overtime we had scheduled to do extra work, would be impacted, all those things. So what we started doing is actually having operations sign that schedule. So we would post the schedule in maintenance and in operations so everyone could see it. But what we started doing now is actually having the maintenance manager and the operations manager sign that schedule. That simple activity of having them sign the schedule forced them to review it and buy into it. Because if they didn't buy into it, they wouldn't sign it. So it was a way to get them involved and show their support for the schedule, show their support for the entire process, right? So a couple ways to create operations buy-in. Again, involve them in the prioritization process, have a weekly scheduling meetings, get them involved with those, save that 10% of available time for operational requests, regardless of priority, and have operations sign and publish that schedule. Now to review the backlog, all right? So, reviewing the backlog, as I said, if you're more mature, you probably don't have to do this, but if you're less mature in your work management process, you probably have to do this on a regular basis. But what we're trying to do here is we're trying to look at what work has been completed but not closed out properly, right? Those ones we got to remove, and we got to notify the requester that the work was done and when it was done, right? And that helps eliminate that perception of the black hole. All right. We can also look to see if stuff is no longer needed. Hey, this was a small job. We made this massive overhaul. That job's no longer valid. We can remove that. Those types of things. It keeps it clean and doesn't muddy the water as much in our backlog. It allows us to get better at scheduling. Right. It also allows us to review and see, did we miss something? Is there something that's out there as significant a period of time and we have not addressed yet? If so, what can we do to get that done to close that up? All right, so we want to use this backlog to review stuff that's been completed, stuff that's no longer valid, get that out of the system, but also look at stuff that has been in there for a very long period of time and make sure we address it. Now, the vast majority of those things, if we have a good work management process, specifically the closeout process on closing out work orders, then we shouldn't have to do a lot of this, all right? And that brings me to the next piece is you need to have a good, robust work management process, all right? Now, I think this is our last poll, but what is your maturity in work management? 1 being least mature, 5 being world class, where, greater than 80 or 90% schedule adherence, high levels of planned work being done each week, those types of things. What do you guys think? 1 to 5.
The Packers here. So, yeah, about half, 50% at about a 3. Then
Okay.
you got 21% at a 2, 18% at a 4, and then you got 7% at a 1, and 3% at a 5. So
okay, so kind of middle of the pack.
They get the awesome stickers.
But kind of middle of the pack. And there's a lot that goes into a good work management process. And it's not just using whatever default workflow came with your CMMS. It is having that business process, having the RACI charts. So who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed for each step of the process? How do we do each one of these steps, and so on and so forth? But having a robust work management process is really going to help us eliminate that perception of black hole. For example, work identification. Most of the organizations I walk into, I can go to the planner's desk and there'll be sticky notes all over that desk of jobs and work requests that he needs to put into the system. He'll be getting phone calls for the same thing, emails, radio calls, all those ways that he gets those work requests. That's not the right way. Those have the opportunity to fall outside of the funnel. And once again, we lose buy-in and support for the process. What we need is one defined way to get those requests identified and into the system. Then going back to that daily review or some other sort of method, we need to decide if this is emergency or unplanned work. Because if it's planned work, we shouldn't be planning it because that's continuing to make the reactive cycle worse, right? That should be going down to the unscheduled work and being executed by the maintenance supervisor or team lead. Now, if it is not an emergency job, it's going to go to planning. And that's where we're going to take that total backlog and start converting it to that planned ready backlog, right? Planners can be just crunching through and planning work, shouldn't be doing much else except developing job plans and doing that conversion process. From there, we're going to go to a scheduling. Now, included in scheduling is that prioritization, whether it's the rhyme method, logic tree method, whatever it is, but we're going to prioritize our work. From there, we got to build that 4-week rolling schedule. Once again, 30% 4 weeks out, 50% 3 weeks out, 75% 2 weeks out, and 100% for next week, right? Once we get that, we're going to hand that off to the maintenance team lead or maintenance supervisor, and they're going to cascade that work to their people, and they're going to go execute that work, all right? Now, as they're executing that work, that's what operations sees. If they see us being proactive, working heavily on equipment, taking advantage of the equipment downtime, that's going to give them a lot of buy-in and support. I remember in a past life not getting downtime from equipment because there'd be one mechanic on an entire line that was down while the other mechanics were off doing other things. We weren't good at scheduling our work, right? And that caused a lot of issues and once again, made the black hole perception worse. Once we get that work done, we get into the work closeout. And this is probably one of the most important pieces of the work management process. This is where we're putting our time, our costs, we're completing the work, we're changing the statuses, we're doing all those things to close that communication loop back to the requesters and let them know that this work is done, it was completed, and so on and so forth, all right? It's one of the most important parts, but yet I often see a lot of organizations struggle with this. What might happen is, the technicians have a printed out work order, they close them all at the end of the week, or they're closing them 2 or 3 weeks after they've been done, or they go to someone's desk and they sit there for a while before they get closed. If we don't have that real-time communication, or as close to real-time as we can get, that communication is going to lack. This work management process is absolutely vital. I will actually be doing another webinar on the work management process in about 2 weeks where we'll dive into this in detail. Stay tuned for that, but it's about 2 weeks out. And then lastly, we got the benefits if we manage this backlog. So if we manage the backlog, you generally see improved morale, all right? You're not getting cranky operations people complaining that maintenance never does anything or they're always doing the wrong work or those sort of things. A lot of that goes away because the work's being done, it's being communicated. Most organizations do some sort of employee survey once a year, and consistently communication comes up on the higher end of that. Same sort of thing. If we're communicating out when the work's going to be done, that it's been completed, those types of things, it's going to improve morale. It's also going to improve asset ownership. If operations sees that we're taking their requests, we're processing them correctly, we're addressing them in a timely manner, they're going to take ownership of those assets and submit more requests to get these other things done. But if we don't do that, they're not going to submit work requests. They're just going to ignore it. It's not worth their time or effort. We're going to see an improved efficiency in our workforce as well. We're going to move that we're going to move that wrench time from those lower numbers to those higher numbers. All right, we're going to be a lot more efficient with our resources, get a lot more work done. We'll be more efficient with our storeroom as well because we know what's coming up. We can plan and order those materials in advance. And then we're going to be more effective in terms of mitigating or repairing equipment issues. As we sort through and we prioritize work properly, consistently, we're making improvements to the system itself. we'll do more of the right work at the right time, and that's overall going to improve the effectiveness. There is a lot of issues with backlog in a lot of organizations. It's not communicated, work's not addressed, it doesn't make it in there, and that's why we get this black hole perception. Now, there's a lot of work that goes into managing that backlog. There's a lot of effort that goes into getting operations buy-in, but this is one of those things that you can directly see, or operations directly sees and is impacted by. So if we can take a little bit of time, get them involved, manage it, and eliminate that perception, we'll get a much more of their buy-in overall for the entire operation of our maintenance program.
On behalf of SoftExpert, thank you for the presence of everyone who participated in this event. If you have any questions, please contact the presenter via email. To see other webinars, ebooks, and white papers on this subject, please visit our website at www.softexpert.com. Find out more about SoftExpert solutions for enterprise business processes improvement, automation, corporate governance, excellence, and compliance management. Thanks for listening. See you next time.